Hello everyone, I'm Liam, and today I'm going to present a little bit on Ælfric of Eynsham and a project relating to this figure and his works. This is the first on this channel and first in hopefully many videos to come, though this one is going to be a very different video than the rest to follow. So we're going to be talking about Ælfric of Eynsham, and this is actually on the left here is the only photo that only depiction that I know of him. All of the medieval stuff doesn't actually depict him from what I could find. This is, of course, taken by Eleanor Parker and is in St. Leonard's Church in Eynsham today, which is an Anglican church. But if we move on, who is Ælfric? Right, so Ælfric was born either 950, 955, somewhere in there in Wessex, England, and he passed away probably around 1010. He was educated at Winchester, what is today called the Old Minster, which we actually have here over on the right. Itself built in the opening years of the 10th century, replacing the earlier Old Minster. So this is the second Old Minster, you could say, as there was an earlier church this replaced, and this was replaced in the Norman period by the church that stands there today. He is, well, he's highly praisable, I guess you could say. This is what one scholar says of him. It says, comparable both in the quantity of his writings and the quality of his mind, even with Bede himself, which is quite the praise to be compared with the Venerable Bede here, who is, of course, generally considered the father of English history and was very much a religious scholar and just, well, all around very good scholar, though he's very much in the early Anglo-Saxon period, while Ælfric is much into the later Anglo-Saxon period. He was a student of Athelwold that headed, along with Dunstan and Oswald, particularly Dunstan, the 10th century Benedictine reform in England. I'm not going to go a lot into this. This is kind of in the idea of, well, taking monks and putting them in charge of things over lay ministry, largely from King Edgar, at least starting with Edgar. And it also dealt with other things like kind of standardizing the West Saxon dialect, which is where Athelwold and Ælfric in particular are kind of concerned, as Ælfric wrote a lot, and we have a lot of his writings. But we also have another quote here. He says he represented the highest pinnacle of Benedictine reform in Anglo-Saxon literature. And so he's very much a guy with lots of praise. And I realize I'm putting this here with nothing really to show for it, but that's what the whole rest of this channel is going to be. We're going to be looking at Ælfric's works. So he is most known as residing at Cerne Abbas, which is just a word. Abbas is Latin for abbey. And most of his works were written here, but he was also later the first abbot at Eynsham. So his world, Ælfric lived in a very interesting time period that I feel like a lot of people are at least generally familiar with, maybe depending on where you grew up. But we have a quote here again. It says, while England bled at every pore, an admirable genius labored indefatigably to lighten her distress by furnishing a rich supply of sound instruction, a stream of healing knowledge to mend and comfort evil times. And so we have lots of stuff going on. Ælfric served during the reign of Athelred the Unready for the most part, a little beyond it as well, which saw a period of renewed and fierce Viking raids. Not, if you've heard Danegeld, right? So a lot of not happy things going on, right? In particular, we have the Battle of Maldon, which is really kicking off this new era of Viking harrying, which is in 991 here. And we actually have the hero, I guess you could say, of the Battle of Maldon poem, also written in Old English, like Ælfric's works, over here on the right. This is Virchnoth at All Saints Church in Maldon. Again, photo credit to Eleanor Parker. So what about Ælfric's works themselves? So we actually have two series of homilies by Ælfric, and we also have many saints' lives. One of these compilations is really essentially a third series of homilies. They're pretty much homilies. We also have the first English translation of the Hexateuch, which is actually, there's a piece of it right here from manuscript here. This is Tower of Babel. He he headed the project. I'm not sure he did all the work himself, but this is kind of a big deal as back in the day, you didn't have many full Bibles. I mean, they're very thick. I mean, you can think at the Codex Amiatinus, which was done, put together at Wearmouth Jarrow. Windbead was live, actually. And that is a very big book, and that is the whole Bible. But it's also done in Latin, right? So, which is pretty typical for the time in Western Europe. And this one is in English, right? Doing the Old English first 6 books of the Old Testament. He also wrote a Latin grammar that he translated. It's written in Latin, Latin grammar in Latin. He actually translated in English, though, and the first of its kind in a vernacular language in medieval Europe, named this. This is kind of where he gets his name, Ælfricus Grammaticus, as he is a grammarian, essentially. When I generally think of the title here, Grammaticus, I normally think of Saxo. But it's nice that Ælfric also had that title that I would like to have someday. He was actually the most prolific writer of Old English. If we look at the Old English corpus, Ælfric, more than any other author, has written the most, which is quite a feat. I mean, it helps that he was writing later in the Old English period, but also still just very impressive. He wrote a lot. He also writes in a very easy-to-read style. While his services, of course, were in Latin, he added English so his audience, like a good priest, could understand. Leoza here actually says, for the edification of simple people who know only this language, which is actually from his preface, his Latin preface to his first series of homilies. He gives a Latin preface and an Old English preface, and they're not the same. So anyways, speaking of his homilies, this is pretty much the 2 versions we have here, actually. So the Sermones Catholici, they're Catholic sermons, right? A homily and a sermon, not quite the same thing, but they're more sermons, really, than homilies. There's actually 2 complete translations of Series 1, and those are the things right here, actually. So we have the first, in English at least, I don't know about other languages, we have Benjamin Thorpe in 1844, 180 years ago. He also did Series 2 in 1846. And then we have Roy Liuza, not sure how to say his name, so hopefully I'm saying it close enough. In 2024, actually, this year, just in October, I have this one right here, actually. So the Barton Oaks does a lot of good Old English stuff. In fact, I have their copy of the Beowulf manuscript as well. And they're relatively cheap, actually, too. So crazy, 180 years later, we get this. And I believe Liuza's actually going to do Series 2 as well. But and Thorpe did, again, like I said, in 1846. So there's also other noteworthy works if you want to look at things like Malcolm Godding's or Peter Clemot's works for the Early English Text Society. These are normally not translations. They'll normally give you the original text, just transcribed into something that is easy to print, rather, just taken from the manuscript and put into a modern book. So you may find those of use. The thing I will say about Thorpe's, while I want this to be something that is readily available or accessible to people, Thorpe's stuff is, since it was written so long ago, is available online for free. And you can find it in a few different places, a few different websites. So his homilies themselves, though, were written primarily from 987 to 1005 at Cerne Abbas, or Cernal Abbey, as is, well, more of an English name here, but Cerne Abbas is what it's called today, actually. So Cernal is its first name I think it's ever recorded as under. So he actually wrote over 160 homilies in total, which is a great amount of homilies, a great amount of sermons to be giving. And he is aptly named because of this Ælfric the Homilist. Now I will say that these series, go back a little bit, these series are written, there's about 40-ish, I think it's 40, maybe it's 45. I would need to double check, I should know this. But they're written so you can have a set of homilies for a year. I'm not quite going to go through them like that, but I'll get to the project here in just a minute. So here it is, actually. Well, first, I want to introduce myself. Okay, so I'm Liam Cutie Hall. You can just call me Liam, or Liam Hall, I guess, if you really want to. I'm father, husband. I am a Christian, right? And this is one of the reasons this project is kind of important to me. I'm also a student, so I have an Associate's of General Studies. This is actually really close to being Associates of Anthropology, but mostly because of time constraints, I decided not to take the last couple courses to get that anthropology degree, which is something, yes, that I definitely regret now. Um, but I also took every French class I could at that school, only a 2-year school. I also have a Bachelor of Arts in the Humanities, mostly focused on soft skills and via the fine arts. It's pretty much an English degree, but instead of just focusing on English, like literature and such, we focus on all the fine arts. Pretty much the degree. I'm also currently working on a master's degree of language and literature, with really focusing on Germanic philology, which leads me to this project itself. Other things I do have another YouTube channel actually, called Liam's Lyceum, where I mostly review fiction books, though occasionally I'll have more philologically themed things on my channel. And I also have a blog, which I've been running for almost 5 years now. It's called Forgotten Realms Lyceum, where I read. I have problems with big projects. I am reading every Forgotten Realms book story that there is. And there's about 300 of those, so I'm about a third of the way through that. It's taken me a few years at this point. I'm also a writer and an editor. You can find me with various things. I mostly write short stories, hence Liam QD Hall. But I also write some longer stuff. In fact, I have one published called Dreamer Awake, which is a sword and sorcery novella. But that's just extra stuff, not super pertinent to this project itself. So pretty much what I want to do is I want to translate the homilies. Right, and I want to recite these in Old English for videos. So my idea is that I'll have a video where I recite the sermon, the homily, just in the Old English. But when I have in reciting that, I'll have the original Old English, but next to it I'll have my translation, my own translation. And so that's the project: is to, one, speak more Old English, and then two, translate more Old English, and then provide that translation for people. I also want to provide a supplementary lecture for each of these homilies. So I'm hoping to, when I come out with a homily, maybe the next day or a couple days later, I'll come out with another video, kind of going over some of the things that I noticed or thought of, or just looking at more particular things, because I'm not going to stop to explain things when I'm reading it. This is mostly going to be philological. Maybe a little bit of theological stuff, but mostly philologically concerned, just dealing with language. And I'm going to try to get these kind of like Ælfric would, right? I don't want to translate these randomly. Don't want to pick randomly. And I want to get them on or as close to the holy days that the sermons are on as I can. Now, the thing is that I probably can't do one of these a week. I didn't prepare this well in advance, so I'm translating these as I go. So I would like if I could do one a week. We'll see if that ever happens. But I'm hoping for at least one a month. Hopefully, or preferably two. So we'll see what happens, and we'll go from there. So these are going to be released on Sundays if I can help it. And these are going to be covering 2025 and potentially beyond, right? And some part of me really wants to do all of Ælfric's homilies, and that's a lot, and that would take me beyond the 2025 calendar year. But we're going to start with the preface. The preface is actually going to come out here in 2024 in December. I'm almost done with that. The translation is pretty much done. I just need to double check a few things, record it, and I'll get a supplementary lecture up for that as well. And then we'll start the new year with the Epiphany homily that Ælfric has. So that is what we have to look forward to first. And so, excuse me, just a few things I wanted to keep in mind. As far as my translation goes, I kind of translated it with biblical language in mind. I was mostly thinking King James Version, but that being said, in mind and not exactly trying to recreate, as the King James Version is, several centuries old at this point, early modern English, and so I think using words that you'll often see in church stuff, at least as far as what I'm used to, I think I'll stick to that. But there are some things I'm going to avoid, and that is that I'm going to use will over shall, right? Like, will do this will happen or whatever, rather than shall. That's mostly just for the ease of you guys. Not everyone is so familiar with that language, especially if not people that don't speak English natively, or are not familiar with such language in their religious practice or whatever. That's not always the case. I'll probably use shall some, but generally I'm going to use will. Also, I'll use you over thou in any form of that second person singular pronoun here. As I think sometimes it could be important to distinguish, as English now has you for the singular and plural. When this was written, that is not the case. And so when it becomes important, I feel like to distinguish it, I probably will. But for the most part, I'm going to use you for, again, similar reasons as will over shall. And here's just another thing that Eleanor Parker shares, like that she says rather, that Ælfric was constantly engaged with the question of how best to communicate complex and challenging ideas to his audiences. And that's what I think is going on here. A lot of this is really straightforward in some sense, but really important and maybe not always straightforward. And so I think Ælfric, from what I've read of him so far, translated of his so far, does do a good job of this. And this is his goal. And so I want that to be my goal as well, as I am kind of taking the reins a little bit over from Ælfric 1,000 years later. So anyways, and I also will, in these videos, I will put the original Old English in the description, so that's easily accessible. And also my translation will be in the description, so that's also easily accessible. It'll be in the video, but I realize getting stuff out of a video is not always easy. You can just copy and paste it or whatever from description on the YouTube video, and feel free to use that. Again, I'm doing this for ease of access in some sense. Okay, and so then just generally here to end my hopes for the project. For myself, I want a better understanding of Old English, right? That's one of the reasons. These first two actually are the big reasons that brought me to it. So I am a philology student, and I've heard that one of the best ways to understand Germanic languages as a whole is to have pretty deep knowledge of one of those languages, particularly a dead language like Old English, right? And so I want Old English mostly because I'm concerned with English, right? Middle English, Old English, Modern English. And so that's one of the things I want to do, is to keep up my translation practice. As this year I took some Old English classes, I likely won't next year, right? But I want to keep that up. I want to get better. I want to improve my Old English capabilities, both with pronunciation and translation, as we work through that. But also with a liturgical year, right? In my Christian upbringing, I've been very separate in some ways, some of like a liturgical calendar from feast days and such forth. And I've wanted to connect more, traditional, culturally with, the traditional Christian calendar. This year, in fact, I even bought a Catholic calendar for my room rather than, the normal Tolkien calendar or whatever I'd get. Because it marks more days that I feel like are good to know about and so forth. And I feel like that's going to help here with this, again, because I want to get these homilies out as close to the feast days that they pertain to as possible. But I also want to make a valuable resource that anyone can use now and hopefully years to come. And hopefully this in some way brings people together. I'm not so sure how this one really will work, or if it will at all, but that is a hope of mine. That there is lots of bad stuff in the world, and there's lots of good things in the world. And I think Ælfric's homilies are one of the good things in the world. And so that's one of the reasons I want to talk about them. Kind of going back with that last slide, talked about like will over shall and you over thou. That I when I tend to translate, and even when I tend to write in modern English, again, if you read my stuff, I tend to use very poetic style. I tend to use a very I don't want to say obscured style, but my vocabulary is extreme in some sense. And I really like writing like that. That's a big thing that I like. So even particularly when I translate like Old English poetry and whatnot, I generally do it in that fashion. But Ælfric wasn't writing for that, right? Ælfric was writing for understanding and for the common people. And so we're gonna work on that, right? We're gonna work on getting the language and the point across as directly as we can. I'll talk a little bit about like, maybe what like a like a direct descendant would be, like the literal modern English, might be. That's one thing like Thorpe does. Even in the preface, there's one point where he says a word, and I'm like, yeah, a modern English reader doesn't understand that. Like, I realize that is the modern English word that the Old English becomes, but it doesn't mean the same thing. So anyways, I want to avoid that. Anyway, and then talk about it in the lecture though. So anyways, that's pretty much my thoughts. Here are my sources. But anyways, this is longer than I wanted it to be, but I hope that you are ready for more Ælfric, and just stick around if you want. You don't have to be Christian. You could be interested in Old English, or you don't have to be interested in either of those things. And you just want to, I don't know, hear my voice. No, but I am hoping that this is a project that I can work on pretty consistently for 2024 and maybe beyond. And I appreciate it if anyone would follow along, if anyone has questions, if we could experience this in many ways together. That'd be a dream of mine. So anyways, Liam, and I will catch you next time. Thank you for watching.